Greece and Turkey, two neighbors that share much more than a sea, are countries bound together by centuries of friction and rivalry. The Aegean Sea, that bright blue paradise scattered with islands, is the epicenter of a dispute where patriotic ambition often leaves little room for cooperation. But this conflict is not only about maps and resources. Every nation has its own dream of greatness, like the Greek megali idea or Turkey's blue homeland doctrine. This is the most serious confrontation inside NATO, a clash shaped by history, identity, and geography, where friendship does not come easy. For decades, population exchanges, the division of Cyprus, and the militarization of islands have kept tensions alive. In this journey, which takes place mostly at sea, we are going to try to understand the peculiar and complicated relationship between Greece and Turkey. Today on Fish Memories, we raise the sails and lift the anchor. Are you ready to come aboard? First, we need to travel into the past to understand why two countries that are supposedly teammates have such a hostile relationship. Their dispute has a very clear name, the Aegean Sea, a geopolitical treasure no sailor could ignore. We could go all the way back to classical antiquity to explain why the Aegean has always been a source of conflict. But it is better to stay in the 19th century, when Greece fought for its independence. In those years, Greece was trying to rebuild its identity, yet Greek nationalism felt unsatisfied. This is when the concept of the megali idea was born, a movement that aspired to expand Greece to the historical frontiers of the Byzantine Empire. Supporters of this idea believed Greece should include not only its modern territory but also Cyprus, Constantinople, which today is Istanbul, and of course every island in the Aegean including Crete. On the other side, Turkey has its own doctrine, Mavi Vatan, which translates as Blue Homeland. Turkey operates in three maritime spaces, the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Mediterranean. Turkish strategists consider these waters their main tool of influence and their best route to access energy resources. In short, Turkey wants to become a maritime power and sees these zones as extremely important borders. One of the key moments in this story is the Greco-Turkish War, a direct consequence of the First World War and a conflict that Greece lost. From that war emerged what we now call Turkey, the successor state of the Ottoman Empire. The conflict ended with the Treaty of Lausanne, which defined the borders between Greece and Turkey. The treaty also prohibited the militarization of the islands, a point that would be reaffirmed in later agreements. To make matters more complicated, the treaty organized a massive population exchange. About 1.6 million Greeks left Anatolia, while almost 700,000 Muslims living in Greece were forced to move to Turkey. This population swap planted the seeds of enormous tension that still lingers today. After these changes, we can fast forward and put on a coat because we are entering the Cold War. In 1952, both countries joined NATO, strengthening the alliance's position against Soviet influence in the Balkans, the Bosporus, and the Mediterranean. Formally, Greece and Turkey had become allies. Yet, even though the chance of open war decreased, we cannot describe them as a happily married couple. Despite the Treaty of Lausanne, Greece began to militarize several islands during that same decade, sometimes keeping it secret. Over the following decades, several incidents caused tensions to spike. One of the most famous was the EMEA crisis in 1995, when both countries played a dangerous tug-of-war over two uninhabited islets. It might sound trivial, but the situation could have escalated into war if NATO had not stepped in to calm things down. There have also been repeated infiltrations, violations of airspace, and maritime confrontations. One of the most recent incidents happened in 2019 when Turkey deployed a seismic exploration vessel near Castellorizo. Greece interpreted it as a direct attack on its sovereignty. So what makes the Aegean Sea so special? The war in Ukraine has made its importance clear. The Aegean is the gateway to the Black Sea, which is the starting point for global grain exports, essential for food security in many countries. On top of that, the Aegean is believed to hold about 3 trillion cubic meters of natural gas and 1.7 billion barrels of oil. In other words, the dispute is really about control over trade routes and access to energy resources. But there is one place we cannot forget when talking about the rivalry between Greece and Turkey: Cyprus. It is the third largest island in the Mediterranean and has been the apple of discord for centuries. For 300 years it belonged to the Ottoman Empire. Then it was taken over by the United Kingdom and eventually became a British colony. The island gained independence in 1960 with a constitution that is considered one of the most complicated in the world. The process was overseen by Greece, Turkey, and the United Kingdom, which became the guarantors of Cyprus's independence. They even retained the right to intervene militarily if any article of the agreement was violated. Cyprus is home to two communities, one Greek and one Turkish. Tensions between them began only a few years after independence. The constitution was nearly impossible to apply, so a number of reforms were proposed. They aimed to eliminate the power-sharing structure, but Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots rejected them. As tensions grew, the northern part of the island pushed for greater autonomy and began to militarize. That is why in 1964, only 4 years after independence, the United Nations established the militarized Green Line. Remember the Greek megali idea we mentioned earlier? Here it becomes relevant with a specific concept known as enosis, meaning union. This was the movement among Greek Cypriots that sought political union with Greece. In 1974, a coup overthrew the island's first leader, Archbishop Makarios III. The coup was supported by a military junta based in Athens, which placed Nikos Samson in power. In response, Turkey decided to invade Cyprus with 30,000 soldiers, taking control of 35% of the island's territory. International pressure eventually restored Makarios to power, but the northern third of the island remained under Turkish Cypriot rule. In 1983, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was declared, a state recognized only by Turkey ever since then. Tensions on the island have remained. Although violence has not returned to the levels of the past, international negotiations have tried for decades to bring both sides closer together, with moderate success. A reunification plan proposed by the United Nations was approved by the Turkish Cypriot North, but rejected by about 75% of the Greek Cypriot population, who believed it gave too many concessions to the Turkish side. It was not the last attempt at reunification, but every effort has failed so far. Since 2023, the international community has watched a surprising warming of relations. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Athens to strengthen ties. Both countries signed agreements in several areas and cooperated on migration management in the Aegean, a sea full of conflicts, but also one of the main gateways for migrants. 1 year later, the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis traveled to Ankara to continue strengthening cooperation with Erdogan. Still, we should not get carried away. This is far from a romantic reconciliation. The division of Cyprus continues to cause sparks, and Turkey is still trying to expand its influence in the Aegean. Even so, both countries have decided to focus on issues that do not set off alarms. And now the question is yours. Do you think Greece and Turkey could one day become true allies? Or could they become the spark that triggers a crisis inside NATO? That's all for today's video. You know the drill. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like, hit subscribe, and dive in for the next one.